Welcome back to Super Supervisors. I am so sorry for vanishing for so long. I fell behind 1 week, then I had my girlfriend down to visit for the week after, so this is the first time I've really had to sit down and actually make one of these in a while. We're going to catch up though. This is a special 3-in-1 episode. To kick things off, we have episode 69. I was going to make a joke, and maybe not the joke you were thinking of. I was going to call this the Slump Staff Roundup, but I guess it's kind of late for that now. This episode was supervised by 3 people. They were Koji Nishizawa, Shuichiro Minabe, and Kaori Takamura, depending on how you read their name. Unfortunately, I don't know Nishizawa's style very well yet, but Takamura stands out in the first half, and Shuichiro Minabe primarily handles the second. Another thing to note is that this episode actually had brand new character designs by Tadayoshi Yamamuro. Although this one was only featured very briefly in the episode, it showed Goku with his hair slicked back and donning a pretty fancy suit. The other was Vegeta, who was thankfully a lot more prominent in his beautiful purple getup. Many of the Dr. Slump characters also received new designs to match Super's aesthetic. But moving on to the episode, as I mentioned, it's Takamura's style that dominates the first half. It's not particularly striking, nor is it that great, so it's not too surprising that the chief animation supervisor Takeo Ide steps in to take it upon himself to redraw many scenes. Takamura's style is a newer discovery for me, but the traits that seem to stand out are her rounded features, round ears, and in particular the sort of inner construction of the ear leads right into the face in front-on shots. This episode is filled with bubbly characters, so it kind of works and it does look pretty passable. Her half ends with what I assume is a shot by Jin Inaba, very on model but with a sort of slightly rounder touch. The second half is where things really kick in. You have Minabe's style taking over, very classic and angular. It really harkens back to some of the traits that you can find in early Dragon Ball Z. And this is where things get really interesting because there are actually some really great animators on this episode. Naoki Tate, my personal favorite, as I'm sure you know, handles a great scene where Vegeta and Arale go at it. You've got some lovely smoke effects, really simplistic but meaty looking, and as Vegeta kicks Arale, you can clearly see Tate's interesting way of animating. A normal kick would impact and follow through, but Tate draws the kick sort of coming in, smearing, impacting, recoiling a bit, and then following through. It's gratuitous animation for such a scene, but it adds such a pop to the kick. Shortly after, we have some Futoshi Higashide, and while I'm sure he did far more on this episode, giving his placement on the key animator list, this is one of the only scenes where you can actually tell that it's him. I assume he was just corrected in other scenes, or maybe he handled some of the Dr. Slump characters since they don't show very defining features. I guess the last thing to mention is that Yukihiro Kitano is a second key animator here. We know he's pretty rough and his work here is no exception. It's just as iffy as his last episode, unfortunately. But that's about it for 69. Nothing too interesting, not particularly polished, but not ugly either. I think that's fine for these kind of one-off episodes, honestly, so no real complaints here. So let's move on to episode 70. This is such an easy one to cover. This was a solo episode by Yoshitaka Yoshima. Solo episode, of course, means that he was the supervisor and the only key animator. Since Yoshima has been so unbelievably busy working on episode 63, 64, 67, and now finally 70, he's given a number of second key animators to polish up his work. There isn't really any noteworthy animation to talk about, so let's just take a look at what styles are on show here. Obviously, Yoshima is pretty easy to notice, especially being the only key animator. You can see the pointy noses that he's pretty much made his trademark now. His art doesn't really appeal to me, but it's not bad. Onto the second key animators, we have a trio of women, in fact. First is Miyako Tsuji, the chief animation supervisor. I spoke about her style in the last episode, or I guess the last video, but just to reiterate, it's nice and round, you have the pretty bulbous ears, and it has a nice degree of polish overall. She almost always does a good job, so it's really no surprise that her input here looks so good. Next up is Miyuki Yokohama, who is just great. She draws pretty close to the character sheets, but with a twist of her own. For example, she loves to have the eyebrows extend quite far out of the face, which really helps with expressions. She's only done key animation once or twice on Super before, which was coincidentally with Yoshima both times, I think, back in the Universe 6 tournament. I'd love to see her more, but her role in this series seems relatively minor right now. I guess she's either early in her career or maybe just too busy with One Piece. Next is Rico Sugawara, and I have to be honest, I'm not 100% sure that this is definitely her, but I'm presuming for now, since this is the only style left over, power of deduction. Like Yokoyama, it's pretty close to the character sheets, but you can see the eyebrows are much thicker and the nose is way more round. This episode is surprisingly polished. It's pretty conservative in terms of movement, which is definitely what you want between arcs, as time should be spent on action episodes, but there's enough movement where it counts, so I'm not too bothered. I'm pretty happy with it. It's exactly what I want from a solo episode, to be honest. On to the next one, episode 71. This is the start of the mini hit arc. This was supervised by Osamu Ishikawa and Masahiro Shimanuki. The large majority of the episode is governed by Ishikawa's supervision, with some pretty large corrections from Tokyo Ide thrown in for good measure too. You can see Ishikawa's softer approach to the characters pretty heavily throughout. He's also a big fan of giving Goku a little half-moon nose, which definitely fits into Ishikawa's cuter aesthetic. One of the most interesting aspects of 71 though, is that they reuse a lot of footage from episode 47. Now Kitate's training action is put to good use here, and although I've seen some comments calling it lazy, it's actually a smart thing to do. If they want to get ahead of themselves before this new arc begins, then animating as little as possible is a great way to do that. It wasn't 100% a copy and paste either. They did actually redraw a scene to make it fit stylistically better with the rest of the episode, so honestly, I have no issue with it. Moving on to Shimanuki's contributions, he mostly provides corrections, which, as expected at this point, all look fantastic. Ever since episode 61, his corrections have just been so strong, really channeling that Boo arc aesthetic. He does do some key animation of his own in this episode, but I think that does unfortunately highlight an unresolved issue with his current output. While he's great when drawing on top of other animators, his raw output is still a little stiff and the character art quite stubby at times. Towards the end of the episode, we have Miyuki Yokohama popping up again as a second key animator. At this point, we know she does good cleanup work, so I don't really have much to add here. That's kind of it for this episode though. There wasn't a whole lot of animation, or at least animation worth talking about. I think the direction was really the strongest point. The use of silence and showing the end of the episode at the start was so good. The episode had 3 storyboard artists, which was a first for Super. I think again, like the reused animation, it's another tactic to get ahead of themselves, so yeah, I enjoyed it. It was all good. The next episode preview though, that's had a bit of a reaction from the internet over the past few days. It's Naoki Tate, it's Yuichi Kurosawa together, which is a wonderful combination. That's 2 of Super's best talents together. I think it looks well animated, I think it's gonna be a good episode, but it's gonna be polarizing, as this preview has been. Tate's style is not for everyone, and it hasn't been very long since either supervisor's episode, so I suspect it'll be rougher than perhaps we're used to from both of them, but we shall see. But thanks for watching. I appreciate that's a lot of information to take in such a short time. Obviously, the next episode is on Christmas or Christmas Eve, depending on where you are, so covering that may take a little while, but yeah, be patient with me. Give me some time, and we'll do something fun. But again, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.